The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for this day.
Welcome to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and Mr. Taylor, whose writings on the industry you can regularly read over on The Wrap, and whose musings on the Mission Impossible movies you can listen to on Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. Well, Drew's not actually here today, today being Saturday, September 23rd, 2023. Drew's in Texas, in Austin to be exact. He's there to cover Fantastic Fest, which began this past Thursday, September 21st, and continues through next Thursday, September 28th. I'm sure that Drew is scoring all sorts of great stories while he's down in the Lone Star State, which we'll hear about on upcoming episodes of this podcast. But before Mr. Taylor took off for Texas, he sat down with Disney vet Dave Bossert, who has not one, but 2 mouse-related books coming out this fall, and those are The House of the Future, Walt Disney, MIT, and Monsanto's Vision of the Future. That one is from Old Mill Press and will be available from Amazon starting on October 17th. And then there's Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas, a visual companion. This 224-page hardcover, which is being published by Disney Deluxe Editions and commemorates the 30th anniversary of the release of that Henry Selick movie, that hits store shelves Tuesday, September 26th. Anyway, as I said, before Drew flew down to Texas, he sat down with Dave, and you can hear the interview that Mr. Taylor did with Mr. Bossert on the second half of today's show. And Drew got Dave to talk about both of his books. Mind you, I was unable to sit in on this interview, which is a shame. Dave's a great guy. I always enjoy talking with Mr. Bossert. He has worked on a lot of amazing projects during his 30 years at the Mouse House, and the guy has killer stories to share. But not to worry, though. Drew and I are doing the divide and conquer thing with this week's Fine Tuning. I'm covering the news portion of the show, and he's doing the feature. And next week, things will be back to normal. Before we get to the news, just want to remind you that the news portion of today's show is brought to you by Fine Tuning's new sponsor, which is Touring Plan's own travel agency. So if you're thinking of heading down to the Walt Disney World Resort in the not-so-distant future, these obviously knowledgeable folks can help you plan your dream vacation. They'll even toss in a free subscription to Touring Plans. So if you're planning on visiting Central Florida sometime soon, please check them out at touringplans.com/travel. Okay, so we were just talking about Disney-related stuff, so it makes sense that we now pivot to talking about Once Upon a Studio, that short film from Dan Abram and Trent Corey, which was created to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Walt Disney Company. Drew and I have been talking about Once Upon a Studio since that Disney-produced short had its world premiere at Annecy back in June of this year. Attendees of that animation festival reportedly lost their minds when they got to see 543 characters from more than 85 different Disney-produced feature-length projects and short films. Wow. By the way, Once Upon a Studio got a similarly strong reaction at Destination D23 earlier this month. Folks who attend that official Disney fan club event, after they saw this 9-minute-long short, then gave the film a standing ovation. And this past week, we finally got a trailer for Once Upon a Studio, so the rest of us can now see what the fuss is all about. And from what I saw, this produced by Yvette Marino and Bradford Simonson project genuinely delivers the goods. It takes a very loose idea that all of the characters from every one of Disney's animated features and shorts decide that they really need to pose for a photo in front of the studio to commemorate the company's 100th anniversary. And The filmmakers used this to create this very meta movie. So what do I mean by meta? Well, okay, how many of you remember Antonio Madrigal from Encanto? That character was Mirabel's little cousin, the one who, over the course of that movie, was gifted with the ability to communicate with animals. Well, in a short film like Once Upon a Studio, Antonio, given his gift, would have a lot of animal friends to communicate with, which is why during his brief appearance in the trailer for this project, Mirabel's cousin is seen with Flit and Miko from Pocahontas, Pua from Moana, Pascal from Tangled, and two of those little bluebirds who help Cinderella make her dress. Speaking of Encanto, later in this very same trailer, we got to see Mirabel's super strong sister, Louisa. She's the one who kept dealing with the village's wandering donkey problem by tossing them on her shoulders. Only this time, instead of just having donkeys up on her shoulders, Louisa has got under her arms Rut and Took from Brother Bear. Meanwhile, up on her actual shoulders, Louisa has Maggie, Grace, and Mrs. Calloway, the cows from Home on the Range, and then up above the cows are two yet-to-be-determined donkeys. I couldn't figure out who they were given the framing. To see John Henry, the title character from the hand-drawn short that Mark Henn directed for Disney back in 2000, they're in the mix with Cruella de Vil, or for that matter, to hear that Tony Bancroft, the co-director of Disney's Mulan, that he was invited back to the studio just so he could work on Once Upon a Studio, that's just chef's kiss. So when do the rest of us get to see Once Upon a Studio? This brand new short is still going to be released theatrically on November 22nd. It'll be in front of Disney's Wish, the Walt Disney Animation Studios' next feature-length project. But out ahead of that, Once Upon a Studio is going to be shown in its entirety on ABC as part of The Wonderful World of Disney, Disney's 100th anniversary celebration. Hosted by Kelly Ripa, this show will be broadcast on Sunday, October 15th. And this broadcast will also include the featured television debut of Disney's Encanto. Okay, so we don't talk about Bruno, but come Monday morning, October 16th, I'm betting that a lot of people will be talking about that Once Upon a Studio short that they just saw. And speaking of things being seen, Drew and I talked about on last week's episode of Fine Tuning about how the new agreement between Disney and Charter was mucking up the 14th and final season of Archer, largely because this adult animated comedy had been airing on FXX, which was one of the 8 Disney ad-supported cable networks, which, as part of Disney's new deal with Charter, will no longer be carried by Spectrum. Lucky for Archer fans, the latest episodes from Season 14 will now be available post-premiere on the video-on-demand versions of FX and FXX, which, given that this adult animated comedy is reportedly coming to a close this season, well, better than nothing, I guess. By the way, worth noting here that given that Spectrum is the second largest cable operator in the United States with 14.7 million customers, that's roughly 20% of the people in the States who get cable, it's Charter's decision to no longer carry the ad-supported version of Disney Junior that seems to be causing most of the uproar. And that's largely because a lot of families now, especially the ones with small kids, no longer have access to Bluey. Now, mind you, this preschooler favorite is still available on Disney+, which Spectrum customers that have the Select plan will have access to, thanks to Disney's new carriage deal with Charter, which guarantees that Spectrum subscribers will have access to Bluey because Disney Plus Basic, that's the version of that subscription streaming service with ads, that's going to be available to Spectrum subscribers as part of Disney's new carriage deal with Charter. Okay, any of that make any sense to you? I mean, I wrote the story and I still have trouble following what was going on. Speaking of entertainment industry-related news, this past week there's reportedly been some movement, at least as far as the Writers Guild of America and the studios, coming to terms with the hope that this strike has gone on for nearly 5 months now. And a lot of the folks I've talked with seem to think that it's really encouraging. After a full week of talks, both sides then agreed that they needed to meet again today. And again, remember, we're recording this on Saturday, September 23rd. That's encouraging. That seems to indicate that some real progress toward a final agreement has been made. Anyway, here's hoping that by the time this episode of Fine Tuning actually posts on Tuesday, September 26th, the writers in the studios have finally resolved their difference, which would then potentially clear the way for serious talks involving the writer's strike. Remember when Drew and I only used to talk about cartoons in this podcast? Towards that end, Mr. Taylor and I, over the past few months, have been talking a lot about The Boy and the Heron, which was supposed to be Hayao Miyazaki's very last movie for Studio Ghibli. Of course, when this animated feature made its North American debut at the Toronto International Film Festival last month, the manager of Studio Ghibli, while he was walking the red carpet, revealed to reporters that Hayao was still coming into work and supposedly talking about the next animated feature he wants to make. So, who knows? That The Boy and the Heron may not, in fact, be the very last Hayao Miyazaki movie. But, which again, hopeful bit of news, but Hayao Miyazaki is 82 years old. And as we learned with last week's sad news in regard to Pete Kozaczek, he was the visual effects supervisor for Night Before Christmas, who sadly passed away earlier this month. Pete was just 72. And by the way, Mr. Taylor and I want to extend our heartfelt condolences to Mr. Kozaczek's friends and family. But okay, anyway, when you're dealing with filmmakers in their 80s, if you're the head of a studio, you have to plan for that day, which will come when your elderly artists, genius though they may be, can no longer physically come into work. And Studio Ghibli just did something this past week that signals that this animation studio is actively gearing up for that sad day when Hayao Miyazaki is gone. On Thursday, September 21st, executives at Studio Ghibli announced that they had entered into an agreement with the Nippon Television Network Corporation. That's Japan's leading television broadcaster, by the way. Under the terms of this deal, Nippon Television Network Corporation will acquire a 42.3% stake in Studio Ghibli. This legendary animation production company will then become a subsidiary of Nippon TV, and then executives from Japan's leading broadcaster will then take charge of this animation studio. Now, mind you, Miyazaki will still be the honorary chairman of Studio Ghibli, but this is definitely the end of an era, folks. Given the day is coming when Ghibli's resident genius, at least when it comes to character and story, will no longer be able to come into work, the executive there got scared, and figuring that they wouldn't be able to continue on their own producing hugely successful films, they opted for financial security. Anyone else out there think that this story actually sounds like the start of a great new Hayao Miyazaki movie, where at some point in the story, all these magical creatures rise up and then drive the heartless executives from Nippon TV out of this beloved animation studio? I'm not sure that's actually going to happen in real life, but here's hoping. And seriously, though, someone out there has to make this movie. I seriously want the Studio Ghibli story to have a happy ending. And speaking of ending, we're now at the end of the news portion of this week's Fine Tuning. In a moment, you'll get to hear Drew Taylor's interview with Disney vet Dave Bossert. But first, this.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and LifeLock has tips to protect your identity. Use strong passwords, set up multi-factor authentication, report phishing, and update the software on your devices. And for comprehensive identity protection, let LifeLock alert you to suspicious uses of your personal information. LifeLock also fixes identity theft, guaranteed or your money back. Stay smart, safe, and protected with a 30-day free trial at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Marqeta. When it comes to your payments provider, you can't afford to compromise. Marqeta's modern payment solutions flex with your business without the trade-offs. Stable and agile, secure and innovative, scalable and configurable. If they say you can't have it all, don't believe them. Your business demands more. Choose a payments provider that delivers more. Choose Marqeta. Visit marqeta.com/Spotify to learn more.
Before we get started here, I really feel like I need to explain who Dave Bossert is. I mean, I know the guy. I think he's great. But I need you to understand how much of the animated entertainment that you love this guy had a hand in. David A. Bossert was born in the Astoria, Queens section of New York City. After graduating from Massapequa High School, Dave turned his attention to art, which eventually led to Dave applying to the California Institute of Arts, better known to all us animation nerds as CalArts. Anyway, Dave was accepted into the character animation program at CalArts on a Walt Disney scholarship, no less. And after graduation, Bossert accepted a position at the Mouse House. He started as an in-betweener in the special effects department at Walt Disney Feature Animation. With the very first film he worked on was 1985's The Black Cauldron. You got to start somewhere. From there, Dave graduated to being a full-on effects animator at Disney, and then Bossert had a front-row seat as Disney's second golden age of feature animation got underway. I mean, he worked on The Great Mouse Detective, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Little Mermaid. By the time Beauty and the Beast rolls around, Dave is now a supervising effects animator. And from there, he went on to work on Aladdin, The Lion King, Pocahontas, Hercules, Hunchback of Notre Dame. And in the middle of all that, Dave did effects work on Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas, which inspired him to write, one of the books that Mr. Bossert and Mr. Taylor will be discussing today. And speaking of books, Dave became an award-winning author over the past decade. His first book, Remembering Roy E. Disney, Memories and Photos from a Storied Life, that hit store shelves 10 years ago this month, September of 2013. That acclaimed volume was then followed by Dolly and Disney, Destino, The Story, Artwork, and the Friendship Behind the Legendary Films, with Disney Editions, published in 2015. Then came Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, The Search for the Lost Disney Cartoons, which was first published in 2017, then revised in 2019 because, hey, they found more Lost Oswald shorts. In between Dave's original Oswald book and the revised edition came Kem Weber, Mid-Century Furniture Designs for the Disney Studios. That was published in 2018. Then in 2020 came Dave's 3D Disneyland, Like You've Never Seen It Before. And then in 2021, we got Bossert's just flat out wonderful Claude Coates, Walt Disney's Imagineer, The Making of Disneyland from Toad Hall to the Haunted Mansion and beyond. Okay, so at this point, you got the idea, right? That if you're a serious Disney fan, you already have a pile of Dave Bossert written books in your reference library. Well, get ready to make room for two more, because as I mentioned at the top of the show, 2023, Dave produced two books. The House of the Future, Disney, MIT, and Monsanto's Vision of Tomorrow, and Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas, a visual companion. So tell you what, let's now listen in on Mr. Taylor's conversation with Dave about how these two handsome volumes came to be.
Dave Bossert, I can't believe we haven't had you on the show before. Thank you so much for being here. Good to see you. It's good to hear from you. Everything good?
Yeah, Drew, thanks for having me on. I miss Jim Hill, and I know he'll be here.
He's here in spirit, and I think few people can say I miss Jim Hill. So you are one of them.
Okay,
But we're
but
so here. You have two books coming out now, right? Or
I do. So
okay.
I have Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas visual companion, celebrating the 30th anniversary of The Nightmare Before Christmas, and that's releasing on Tuesday, September 26th. And
Okay.
then I also have The House of the Future, Walt Disney, MIT, and Monsanto's Vision of Tomorrow. And that book has like a tiered release. So the author signed copies have gone out to people who pre-ordered the book, and it officially launches on Amazon on October 17th.
Wow. Okay. And people who have read your other books and I always love you just digging into one specific topic in the way that only Dave Bossert can do. But tell me about the Monsanto book and what it's all about.
Well, Drew, I had never seen the House of the Future, the Monsanto House of the Future, as it was called. It was installed at Disneyland just at the entrance of Tomorrowland, really on the property where Pixie Hollow is now. If your listeners will know where that is, that's about where the House of the Future was. And it was there until 1967 when they took it out. And so I had never seen it. I never toured it. I was very fascinated with that particular attraction, and it was a free attraction. There was no charge to go through it. It was a walk-through attraction. And I had been fascinated with it for many years, and I decided, well, I picked topics that are, haven't really been covered and that I know I could do some kind of a deep dive on. And so I decided I wanted to take a tour of the House of the Future. And that's how I set up the book. The book it gives how the House of the Future came about, all the back history of it and the context. And then at some point in the book, there's a tour map, and there's an actual the chapters are set up the way you would have seen the House of the Future had you gone up the steps and entered it and walked around it and then came out. It's set up in that same order because I wanted it to be a tour of the House of the Future, and you get to see not only the original version of the house when it opened in 1957, but you also get to see some of the remodels of the interior that went on several times until 1967.
Wow, this sounds like a time machine in a book, basically.
Kind of. It's an immersive experience, and again, I wanted it to be as thorough as I possibly could so people would walk away after they read the text and see all of the pictures. And there's a ton of pictures. I keep getting notes every day from people saying, my God, there's so many pictures in here, and I've stuff I've never seen before. And that's what I love hearing from people when they go through one of my books. So for me, it was really about having that experience as close as you could possibly get without physically being in the House of the Future.
Well, where did these pictures come from? Did you source them all? Or did people send you things?
It was a combination of things. I was able to get a lot of material from the Monsanto archives, from the MIT Museum in Boston, from private collections, from my own collection of stuff. So there's plenty of material in there that I think people are going to go, wow. I've never seen this before. And they're going to be doing that a lot through this book.
I love that. I cannot wait to see this. Let's talk about Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yes.
I think there are a couple of books coming out, but I think we know that the definitive one is going to be the Dave Bossert book.
Yeah. Disney Editions is certainly celebrating the 30th anniversary of The Nightmare Before Christmas. I think there might be a cookbook coming out. I think there's, I don't know. And there's the entire script that they've created a book out of. But my book, Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas visual companion, is really a thorough behind the scenes of how this movie got made. And the entire process is dissected and talked about through the eyes of the filmmakers, artists, and technicians that worked on the film.
Wow. Well, you were at Disney? Were you at Disney? You were at Disney when this thing came out,
no,
right?
I was not only at Disney, I actually worked on Nightmare Before Christmas. I have a screen credit as snow animator.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, I've said this a number of times. When Disney Editions approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in writing the Nightmare Before Christmas, I said, I worked on the movie. And they said, no, we had no idea. So that was a plus that I had actually worked on the film. But the other interesting thing is that I tell people I did very little, a very small part of that movie. And I say that because there were an enormous number of artists and animators and technicians that worked on that film for a couple of years and put their heart and soul into it and made what I think is an absolutely beautiful holiday classic that bridges Halloween and Christmas. And so for me, I was happy to help them when they needed some help. And it was really to put snow in Halloween Town in that one sequence. And that was it. And I did that with a software engineer named Trin Huang. And I always want to give him a shout out because there'd be no snow in The Nightmare Before Christmas if it wasn't for Trin writing the software that allowed us to do that.
That's amazing. Well, when you were working on it, did you have a feeling that you were working on something special, or was it just sort of like, what is this going to be?
It was Tim Burton. He was established at that point with having done Beetlejuice. He used to work at Disney. He had gone to Cal Arts, where I had gone to Cal Arts. I had a couple of his picture books. There was a children's book version that he had done of Nightmare Before Christmas. I had a couple of those. And I love stop motion. I mean, I'm of the age where I remember watching Jason and the Argonauts and, the Ray Harryhausen stuff and the original King Kong that was done as stop motion. And I also grew up watching Gumby and Pokey and Davy and Goliath. And it was sort of a combination of all those things. I always loved stop motion. I had done some little stop motion films myself when I was in high school. And so I was always a fan. And so when they were doing this film, I loved Tim's designs. I loved the idea of sort of this mashup of Halloween and Christmas, and just was honored when I was asked to do a little bit of work to help them out. And that's really what it boiled down to.
Well, so I haven't not gotten a copy of this book yet, but did you get to go back to Henry Selick and Tim Burton and all the people? Okay.
Yeah. So when I started to do all my research, the first thing I did was I started reaching out to everybody, so I did an interview with Tim Burton. I spent a day with Henry Selick up at his home in the Bay Area. I met and spent time, a number of hours with Danny Elfman talking about the music. I interviewed Rick Heinrichs, who's the production consultant, but really, I think, a production designer. I interviewed a number of the assistant art directors. The art director, Dean Taylor, was moved back to Australia, so I didn't talk to him. But I did in-person and Zoom interviews with most of the animators and head of puppet fabrication, producers, production people. I really tried to sort of get a sense of the movie from a lot of different vantage points. And what was most important for me was to actually write the story through the eyes of the filmmakers.
Okay. And did you discover anything, or did you get an anecdote from somebody that you were like, wow, this is really new, nobody's heard this before, and fans of this movie are going to absolutely adore it?
Well, I think there is one bit in there, and I actually show a still frame there. When you do stop motion, it's usually a small budget. You don't really have budget to do reshoots. So you really have to do the shot like first time through, right? And, except what they call a pop through, which is sort of like a pose of the shot that you film. and then you review with the director before you actually do the frame-to-frame animation. And there was one shot where the vampires are playing hockey on the frozen pond. And the original shot, the hockey puck that they hit into the camera was actually Tim Burton's head. And it was like a little caricature of Tim Burton. And Henry got a little cold feet on showing that to Tim and had the shot redone with, I think it's a pumpkin.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that was kind of an interesting little tidbit, a little story behind that. And I actually asked Tim about it, and Tim kind of, because he's an artist and he was an animator, and he understood why they would do that and wasn't offended by it, And I think, had Henry known that today, had he known what he knows today, maybe he would have left that in for the fans,
Yeah. Are you still in love with Nightmare Before Christmas? Do you go to the Haunted Mansion and everything?
Yeah, no, I absolutely am. I've always been a fan of the film. I will say that it's a bona fide holiday classic, but some people call it a cult classic. It's not. Maybe early on it was, but I think it's gone beyond that. I think it's a bona fide holiday classic, like the Rankin and Bass, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and Frosty the Snowman, and the Charlie Brown Christmas special, and the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, the Chuck Jones version, of course. And I watch it almost religiously every year, whether I go to the El Cap, because every so often I get invited to be at the El Capitan with Don Hahn, who usually hosts that show. And when I do go to the El Capitan, after I've done my bit on stage with Don, I go back to my seat and I sit in the theater and watch the movie, because I love seeing these films projected on a big screen, because, sometimes when you do those events, people are like, I've seen this movie a million times, so I'll do my bit on stage. I'll talk, I'll answer questions. And then, when the lights go down and the movie starts, I'm out the door and in my car driving home. But that isn't the case, because I actually do go back to my seat. I sit sometimes with my family, and I watch the whole movie until the end.
Well, I wanted to ask about Danny Elfman, because he really is Jack, right? Like, he fought for the role and to be able to be the singing voice. And I know he was very kind of injured by Chris Sarandon being the speaking voice.
Yeah, and I talk about that in the book.
Yeah, what is he? Is he over it? Or
no, I think he's over it. I mean, I think he understood, but it's still a hurtful thing to have to go through, and it was a very difficult conversation for Henry and Tim to have. And but it was the right choice creatively for the film. They really needed somebody with acting chops to do the speaking voice.
Yeah. Have you ever been to his, big Hollywood Bowl show?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, the first year they did it, I wrote the program notes for the souvenir program that they sold.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. And by the way, they just announced that they're doing the Hollywood Bowl Nightmare Before Christmas on Friday the 27th, Saturday the 28th, and Sunday the 29th this year. And it's a big 30th anniversary. I've been told that there's going to be some surprises. I can't tell you what those are, because they would kill me. They'd kill me first and ask questions later. But the fact is there's going to be a spectacular Hollywood Bowl show those 3 nights, and I've been to it. I think they do a fantastic job. Richard Kraft, I believe, is the producer again this year. He's done them before. He produces the whole show. He's Danny's manager. He's absolutely fabulous. He knows what the fans want, because he's a fan.
Yeah. And every year they say this is the last year. So you never know when it's actually going to be the last year. So go when you can.
Yeah, something I don't necessarily think it'll ever be a last year. Even if you don't get Danny or any of the talent to come out on stage, they'll probably still do it every so often as a show. Yeah. And I think it's very special to see the live orchestration with the LA Phil, or, whatever group of musicians they put together, and to see a film in that venue on a big screen with live singing and all of that kind of stuff. It's just a very special experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, The movie is so interesting because it was not a hit out of the gate. I remember going to see it opening day, and it was in like the smallest theater in the multiplex where I went to see it. But it's grown so immeasurably over the years. I mean, did you have the feeling that, oh, this will stick around, or were you sort of dismayed like the rest of the company at the initial
Well,
disappointment, I guess?
I think at that point I was kind of jaded individual, I had been in the business for a while. And so I felt like it got really shorted on the marketing end of things. And I talk about that in the book because they didn't really know how to market this movie. They put it under the Touchstone label because they thought it might be too out there and too frightening for their Disney core audience. So they put it under Touchstone, and then they didn't really know how to market the movie because nobody really cared about this film. They really were more interested in being in business with Tim Burton and having Tim do some live action films for them than they were caring about this movie. This was just this little movie. It has a small budget. If this was a way to get Tim Burton back to Disney so he could do live action movies for Tim, for Jeffrey Katzenberg, then so be it, and I think had they put this out under the Disney label, had they marketed it properly as a family movie that people would really, enjoy, you could take your whole family to see this, I think it would have done better out of the gate. But that's one of the reasons why it got this following. And I think what's so wonderful 30 years on, Drew, is that you've got people who saw it when they were kids are now taking their kids to see it and to go to these special screenings like at the El Capitan or at the Hollywood Bowl, or to just watch it on Disney Plus.
Yeah, and I think now it is labeled Disney, right?
It is.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. A number of years ago, they actually stripped Touchstone off of it, and it's now Disney's Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah, which is disappointing because I always liked the black and white Touchstone label that was attached to it. But yes. I guess we have Ed Wood with that same label.
Yeah.
Do you think that Frankenweenie will have a second? You think you'll be writing a Frankenweenie 30th anniversary book?
I have no idea. I mean, that's something I honestly think would be a wonderful book, because you've got the live action short, the 30-minute short that Tim did when he was at Disney back in the 80s. And then you've got this feature length stop motion version of the film. I would love to delve into that. I think it would be a fascinating book to have, and have a lot of behind the scenes material for it.
Were you able to talk to Paul Reubens before he passed for the book?
No, and unfortunately, I have to tell you a story here, because Paul Reubens was an alum of Cal Arts. He went through the theater school at Cal Arts. And so Paul and I served on an iteration of the Cal Arts Alumni Association back around 2000. He was president, I was vice president. We did a bunch of events, and did a big 30th anniversary celebration that we helped organize for the school. And when I got this assignment to do this, I sent Paul an email and I didn't get a response. And now, sadly, because he passed away a few months ago, it was around the time that he was diagnosed with cancer.
Oh,
and
wow.
So, he was privately battling that, and I had no idea. And I just thought, well, he doesn't want to respond to me, I'm not going to push it,
Right.
But after he passed away, and I read these obituaries and found out what he died of and when he got diagnosed, and so I was like, wow. In fact, he was probably, I think, a couple years into that health battle.
Wow. Well, the other fallen comrade in the Nightmare Before Christmas story is obviously Joe Ranft, and
Yeah.
I am sure you found archival stuff and talked to people about how much he meant. But maybe just talk about who he was and what he meant to Nightmare Before Christmas.
So in the book, there's actually a sidebar on Joe Ranft, who in the story chapter, Joe has had a story. He was also friends with Tim from the early days when they were both starting out at Disney Animation. And he's probably considered, I think, to be one of the top story artists of this generation of animators. John Canemaker wrote a wonderful book called The Two Joes, and it profiles Joe Grant, who was probably one of the great story artists of the golden age at Disney, in the 30s, 40s period, and Joe Ranft, who arguably I think is one of the greatest story artists of our generation, and really was the backbone of story for Pixar when they were starting out with Toy Story and the other films they did.
Yeah, and absolutely a titan of the creative space who also died very tragically.
Yeah, and so there's a sidebar and there's some beautiful quotes from Tim Burton about Joe. I also did a sidebar on Kelly Asbury, who was a classmate of mine at Cal Arts. And Kelly was a huge help, really gave me a lot of background information on the art direction and some of the things that went on behind the scenes in translating Tim's drawings to the three-dimensional puppets and sets. And unfortunately, Kelly passed away of cancer in 2020, just as the pandemic was getting going. And so I did a very nice sidebar, and Rob Minkoff, who was good friends with him, who was one of the co-directors of The Lion King, Rob gave some beautiful quotes for that. And then the other person that has a sidebar is in the animation chapter, and it's a gentleman named Paul Berry, who passed away in 2000. And he was considered to be one of the greatest stop motion animators of, again, our generation. And there's some wonderful stories about him and some of his colleagues talking about him in that sidebar. So I really tried to cover everything I could cover about this movie and how this movie got made.
When you were spending that day with Selleck, did you try to get him to show you some Shadow King stuff? That would be my primary goal, just to kind of.
No, I literally, Henry's a rather private guy, and I really just stayed focused on Nightmare Before Christmas. I was very honored that he invited me into his home. He had some beautiful production puppets in his house, and there's a picture of, I believe, one of them, which is I think the original sculpture of Sandy Claus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Who made that? Did Rick make that? Or?
I believe it was made by Rick Heinrichs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and there was some really interesting stories and Henry opened up about, and it was just a really nice, memorable day that I spent with him.
Well, I heard him say recently, that had he known he was making Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas and not Henry Selick's The Nightmare Before Christmas, he might have been less sore about sort of where the praise for the movie was heaped. But did you get the sense that he's mellowed about that? Did you get into that at all?
I think that, when I talked to him, I think he was pretty mellow about it, but I think there was a hint of sensitivity to it. But, one of the things I always talk about when I talk about Nightmare Before Christmas is that it was directed by Henry Selick. It wasn't directed by Tim. Tim produced it. It was Tim's idea, but it was directed. That movie, the responsibility of that movie that you see on screen was on Henry's shoulders, and Henry is a brilliant director, especially in stop motion. And all you have to do is go look at Coraline or Wendell and Wild or James and the Giant Peach or Monkey Bones or, any of the films that he's done over the years. They're just brilliantly crafted films, whether you like the movie or not. They're just brilliantly crafted films.
Well, I think I heard at one point that the production said, that they were getting better as the movie was going along. So like, minute 72 is better than minute 1. And did you get evidence to reflect that?
Well, I think when I was talking to a lot of the animators, you got to realize most of those animators never did a feature film.
Yeah.
Right. And most of those animators were cutting their teeth on piecemeal work like Pillsbury Doughboy commercials and, working with Art Clokey on Gumby and Pokey. So the fact that they were able to, do stop motion animation for well over a year in a warehouse in San Francisco, of course you're going to get better at it. You get better at anything that you do every single day. You just continually get better. And they were very inventive in how they did stuff. They really cared about what they were doing.
Yeah. I mean, we seem to be kind of in a golden age of stop motion almost between Pinocchio and Wendell and Wild, like you said, and we've got a new Chicken Run this year. Are you still in love with the medium?
I really am. In fact, I have to say, I'm a fan of a lot of the films that Leica has done up in the Portland area, especially like Box Trolls and Coraline. Those are beautiful films, and I don't think they get enough attention from the public. And I think some of the stop motion is almost verging on too perfect, where it's almost feeling like it's CG animation. It's that good, which is a compliment, to the skill of the animators. But I kind of like a little bit of that handmade quality that you see in Nightmare Before Christmas, and you see in, the Rankin and Bass holiday specials like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Frosty the Snowman. I like to see a little bit more of the hand of the artist, but I still love the medium. I still enjoy it. I just went and saw The Inventor last weekend.
Oh, right.
Which
Anthony's
is
movie,
written and directed by Jim Capobianco, who wrote Ratatouille for Pixar. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And there were several members of the production team that had worked on Nightmare Before Christmas worked on that film. The Inventor. It's out in theaters. People should go see it. It's a beautiful, handcrafted, stop motion movie with some 2D sequences, and it's gorgeous. I loved it. And it's Drew, it's a true family film.
Yeah.
There's no controversy. There's nobody coming out and saying, oh my God, there's this kind of a character, or they're doing this, and I'm not going to take my kids to see it. There's none of that. This is a beautiful family movie. Anybody could go see it. You could take kids to see this. Nobody's going to object to anything. It's just beautiful.
I can't wait.
And it's based on historical facts. So you got that. And of course, Chicken Run. I love the first one. I can't wait to see the second one. And that's more, claymation. That's stop motion claymation animation.
Yeah, hopefully there'll be some fingerprints in there so that you can see it and say, there we go.
Yeah. And by the way, I love that, because again, you sense the artist is making this, it's beautiful. And Del Toro's Pinocchio, I loved that film. I just loved his take on that classic Carlotti novel, and it was very different from the Disney Pinocchio. And by the way, I can't say the same about the live action Pinocchio that Disney did. That was a dud.
The less said, the better about that.
Yeah,
one.
Exactly.
Well, Dave, I know you well. I know you're always working on 10,000 projects. What else is coming down the pike for you?
Well, I'm always busy. I've got a bunch of book projects on the boards that I'm doing research on. For me, Drew, it's never about one project, start it, finish it, and then start the next one. I always like to work with, multiple things. I'm juggling a lot of balls, as it were. And so I have book projects that I've been researching and accumulating material for years. That are going to come to fruition in the coming years. So,
well, yeah, I'm sure they are going to be about subjects that maybe people didn't know were so interesting. There'll probably be some subjects that are a little bit more commercial, but you have a new slant on them. Is that fair to say?
Something, it's always going to be a mix of stuff with me, but it's always going to be projects that really haven't been dealt with or haven't been dealt with in the way that I dive into things.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about doing it. I'm not knocking other things that are out there. It's just I'm more interested in learning and knowing about something that really hasn't been written about.
Or in the case of Nightmare, a whole new angle on things.
Well, something, nobody's really done a making of book on the Nightmare Before Christmas that really tells the story through the eyes of the artists. The book they put out in 93 was almost a promotional companion to the movie.
Yeah.
But it doesn't dive into how the puppets are made and show you pictures that, they took when they were casting Oogie Boogie, and how his armature went into it, and the limitations they had with, that puppet, because he was so large. He was the largest stop motion puppet to be animated at that time.
Really bigger than
Yeah.
King Kong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
and so to me, having that kind of look into the making of, the behind the curtain of a film, I think is hugely important, not just only from a historical standpoint, an oral history, if you will, written history, but also it's fascinating for the fans who love the movie and just really are hungry to know, how did they do that?
Yeah.
I mean, when you're watching the film, you sit there and go, how did they do that? I don't know how that happened, and the likelihood is they're going to find out by reading this book and looking at, I mean, just an unbelievable amount of pictures in the book, because a lot of that material I sourced from the artists themselves, their personal photos that artists had the wherewithal to say, hey, I better take pictures of what's going on here for posterity, not just for myself, but maybe somebody will use them at some point in the future.
And that's when Dave Bossert strikes.
Well,
pictures.
Literally at the end of every interview I did, I would say, do you have any photos, personal photos, ephemera, anything you saved from the movie that you'd like to share? And so people were scanning and sending me stuff. And then it was easy to get there, to get them to sign a release so we could put it in the book and all of that kind of stuff, because it was their personal, they took the pictures.
That's amazing. And it's also, nice to have hindsight, because you're right, that original book was very cheery and, we're going to take on the world, and then the movie fizzles, and, it has this whole second life, and you're able to get into all of that with the kind of benefit of distance.
Yeah. And I feel very fortunate, because Disney Editions did a beautiful job on this book. They really have. And also, I wasn't edited as heavily as I thought I would be.
That's great.
As far as, because Disney is Disney, and they want to sanitize stuff and, try and take the edge off of things if they have to. And I don't blame them. I really don't. But I also think there's something to be said about telling the full story. And I pushed back on some notes where they were trying to cut something, and I pushed back, and I was able to keep things in that I thought were important to keep in. And there was a few things that I just wasn't going to win that battle, and you just got to let it go,
Do you want to share it? You want to share any anecdotes here?
I will tell you that there was a quote from Tim Burton that they absolutely wanted to have taken out.
Okay.
And I didn't think it was terrible, but it didn't put the company in the best of light. But it wasn't a nasty comment, but it was a true comment.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to face the truth about that. So that had to come out, And I was actually kind of surprised, because it was a Tim comment, it was a Tim quote.
Yeah.
But look, that's the way the ball bounces, and you got to pick and choose your battles, and you go from there.
And you got more in than you thought you would. So let's say it's a net win there. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Listen, I've had a number of books where I said, oh, I put that in thinking it was going to get cut out, and you're letting me keep that in. Wow, that's awesome.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for chatting with me. Is the podcast still going on? We need to plug Skull Rock.
Oh, well,
right?
Yeah. So let me give a couple of plugs here.
Okay.
People can go to my website, davidbossert.com. There's a tab there for free stuff. So if people buy my book and they live someplace in the world or far away in the country, they can write to me with a self-addressed stamped envelope enclosed, and I will send them a signed book plate. This is something,
amazing.
Yeah, this is something that I like to do, because, there's people in various parts of the United States and Canada who, they may never be able to come to an event that I'm going to be at to sign books, and they might not be able to get their book signed, but they can get a free book plate with my signature on it. And by the way, I really do sign those myself. There isn't an autograph machine doing it. I sign them myself, and I put them in the envelope, and I mail them back to people. So that's something I like to do. So you can do that at davidbossert.com. And there's like 60 articles I've written over the years, and program notes and all kinds of stuff that people can read. It's all free. So go to davidbossert.com. If you want to get a signed edition of my House of the Future book, go to theoldmillpress.com. Theoldmillpress.com. They can get a signed edition now. They don't have to wait until mid-October when it releases through the bookstores and the online retailers. So that's at theoldmillpress.com. And then the Skull Rock podcast.
Yes.
So
you need to have me and Jim on the podcast. I think
I will invite you guys onto the podcast because something, I started that podcast. It was very serendipitous, like everything I do. It's like it just fell into my lap. But I was on Al John Go's Disney List podcast in the summer of 2020, in the height of the pandemic, promoting my 3D Disneyland book. And we had such a great rapport that I sent Al John a note saying, that was really great. I really enjoyed the interview, and thank you so much for, promoting the book. And he wrote back and he said, man, he goes, you ought to do your own podcast. And then I wrote him and I said, well, if I ever did a podcast, I'd do one with you. And then he wrote back, he goes, are you serious? Because if you're serious, I'll do a podcast with you. And by October of 2020, we launched the Skull Rock podcast. And we've pretty much, except for around the holidays when we do some vault shows, we do a show every week.
Wow.
And we've got like 150 shows in the can. And, we interview people all about animation, hear all the behind the scenes stories. We've interviewed authors, writers, musicians, composers, animators, directors, producers, you name it. It's all about Disney and pop culture. So the Skull Rock podcast, you can get it anywhere you get your podcasts.
There we go. The sun, you know what I always say? The sun never sets on the Dave Bossert empire.
Well, I was going to say this is Dave's media empire.
It really is. It really is. And I'm sure there'll be. We should do something at Gallery Nucleus again, but actually in person this time.
Something. I actually. It's funny you mentioned that. I really would love to do that with the folks at Gallery Nucleus, with the House of the Future and the Nightmare Before Christmas book.
Yeah, let's do it.
If you got an in with them and you want to reach out to them, I'm happy to do something.
Let's do it. So when you see that on the calendar, it came from this interaction now.
Fantastic. I appreciate it.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for coming on. And we cannot recommend not only these books, but all of your books, everything you've done, essential reading and looking. I love that 3D Disneyland book. It's so great. Talk about a time machine. That's the time machine.
By the way, I shouldn't even say this, but I will. There's going to be another one.
Oh my God. I think you told me that already, but yeah. I am so shocked right now. There's
going to be another one on Disneyland, and there's also going to be a separate book on Knott's Berry Farm and Calico Ghost Town.
Ooh, I love that. I love
so
that.
Anyway, I am just having a ball, and the best part of it is I get to talk with people like you, Drew, and Jim. Whenever I will talk to Jim.
Well,
someday,
eventually,
eventually when Jim is on. I mean, I am one of the few people that likes him.
Yes, correct. Thank you so much. That was great.
Wasn't that fun? And speaking of fun, Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast, which is hosted by Drew and his equally talented co-host, Charles Hood. If you're not listening to this, folks, you are definitely missing out on some genuinely entertaining and informative podcasts. And speaking of podcasts, we have a few here on Jim Hill Media Podcast Network we'd like you to check out. We have Disney Dish, which I do with Len Testa. We have Marvelous Disney, which I do with Aaron Adams. By the way, Aaron has his own outside Patreon project, 32nd Street, which is about what goes on Madison Avenue. And Scary stuff, folks. Also, we have Looking at Lucasfilm. In fact, when I finish here, I get started on working on that show, which I'll be recording with Brian Gahn later tonight. Also, you may want to be aware, folks, that 2 shows that we previously did here at the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, Universal Joint and I Want That, will be coming back shortly. And that's honestly because of Len and my newest project, A Disney Unpacked. That's our first ever video series, which we've been producing in collaboration with veteran Imagineer Jim Schul, who spent 30 plus years at Walt Disney Imagineering creating some of your favorite attractions to the park. Things like Rock and Roller Coaster and Mater's Junkyard Jamboree. Disney Unpacked debuts on Patreon early next month, so keep an eye out for that. Beyond that, okay, this is where we talk about social media. And so if you're looking to follow Drew, who's all over the place and is still at Twitter, X, whatever they're calling it, there you can find him as Drew Tailored, and tailored is spelled like a tailored suit. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Jim Hill Media, and over on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News. If you could do Mr. Taylor and I a favor, if you could head over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review, not just the show you're listening to right now, Fine Tuning, but also Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. That would be cool. And if you really, really, really like what you heard here today, if you want to head over to Bandcamp and subscribe, that would be cool as well. And as promised, Mr. Taylor will be back next week. And me personally, I am very much looking forward to hearing his tales of what he saw and did in Austin at Fantastic Fest. But until then, thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.